I have two brief questions I'd like to ask, if I may.
Hi, welcome to Left Foot Media. My name is Brendan Malone and you're watching The Daily Question. Today's question of the day is 10 arguments for deleting your social media accounts right now a good book? Now, the reason I'm asking that question obviously is because I've just finished reading this book this week. Here's what I think. In a nutshell, I would describe this book by Jaron Lanier, who is a Silicon Valley computer scientist and entrepreneur and well known for his work in those areas. I would describe this book as frustrating. The reason it's frustrating for me is, well, there's a couple of reasons actually. Number one is because this is an area I have a lot of interest in, I've read widely about, and there's a lot, I think, to be said about the role of modern tech, particularly social media, and its influence in our society and in our personal lives, and the way in which it is actually harming us as human persons and our ability to form meaningful community and connection with other people. And so there's a lot you could say about that, but this book doesn't really go too deep on that at all. It's also frustrating because it often strays off the topic. So basically, where this book is at its strongest is when he stays within his own wheelhouse. And his wheelhouse is computer science. And the most interesting, I think, and fascinating aspects of this book are actually the whole issue of social media algorithms. And there's a lot, in fact, there's a lot more that could be said, which is not said in this book. Because this book goes into all sorts of other territories. It sort of regularly jumps all around the place into other areas. And as a result, you don't really get enough information, I think, and there's not enough focus given to the whole role of social media algorithms, the way in which they pull us down rabbit holes, the way in which they have a bearing on the way we think about the world and other people. And for me, it's just such a shame. Like I said, when he talks about the tech stuff, that's his wheelhouse, that's where he's strong. But he also delves into other areas where he is not qualified and doesn't have a particular strong area of sort of knowledge or expertise in, and you get stuff that's just really frustrating. So for example, at one point he delves into the area of psychology and he puts forward this theory about the fact that the human person, according to him, has these two settings that we can be in when we engage with the world and with people around us. One is what he calls the pack setting, so we get into a pack mentality, like a pack of wolves, or we can be a lone wolf. And what he argues is that we're meant to be a lone wolf, and that's sort of how we flourish more. And the pack setting is not a good thing, and that's what happens to you on social media. Well, I would completely disagree with that for a couple of reasons. First of all, it's a false dichotomy. Secondly, it's not really true to say that we're supposed to be lone wolves. In actual fact, clearly the human person is made for community. We know that. We've got enough human experience and research now in these areas to know that we really flourish in community, and that living isolated or isolating ourselves in that way isn't actually necessarily a good thing. So it's kind of not really a particularly satisfying way to look at this issue. And this is what I'm talking about when I say that when he gets out of his wheelhouse, it's not so good. He sort of taps into philosophy at one point very briefly. There's also politics and polemics. There's plenty of polemics in here that I found really, really frustrating. And I'll give you an example of some of the things. So for example, at one point, he talks about all sorts of issues like Black Lives Matter. He talks about Gamergate. He talks about Hillary Clinton and the US election. There's a little bit much of an obsession, I thought, on that. I mean, clearly he lets his politics show a lot in this book. And it's kind of frustrating because you want him to stay focused on the actual issue of social media and the actual intricacies of that and how it's working and what it's doing to us. But he often sort of just delves into politics a lot and uses those. He uses them as his examples, but he often gets bogged down in the personal politics stuff. Let me give you an example of something where he's out of his wheelhouse and where things just, I think, really go off the rails for him. So he's talking about Hillary Clinton. I'm going to quote you from the book here. At the end of the day, the social media machine and its money-making caused black social media to unintentionally elevate a new tool optimized for voter suppression. As if there weren't enough voter suppression tools out there already, as if gerrymandering, inaccessible polling stations, and biased registration rules weren't enough, a lot of potential Hillary voters were infused with a not great feeling about Hillary or about voting at all. Were you one of them? If so, please think back. Were you seeing any information customized for you before the election? Did you use Twitter or Facebook? Did you do a lot of online searches? You were had. You were tricked. Your best intentions were turned against you. So in other words, what he's saying here, the argument he's making is that the reason there was this low black voter turnout for Hillary was in actual fact that they were tricked. It was part of a conspiracy, or even if it wasn't deliberate, the social media machine caused black voters not to want to vote for Hillary, and if it hadn't been there, they would have voted for her. Well, I would argue that's absolute nonsense. If you looked at that election, you had a pretty difficult choice to make for a lot of people, and Hillary was not at all a glowing candidate. It's not like you would look at her as a black voter and go, yeah, she's our woman. Not at all. There were plenty of reasons for all sorts of demographics not to vote for her. So to sort of pin this on social media, he's well and truly out of his wheelhouse now. Here's an example of some of the polemics that he engages in. This is on an issue that I'm obviously connected with, and he starts talking about the issue of abortion and pro-life stuff. So he starts with this. I'll give you the example that he then refers to. I'll jump ahead to the money quote. But first of all, he says this: should machines be given equal rights, as is so often proposed in tech culture? Indeed, Saudi Arabia has granted citizenship to a female robot, and with that citizenship, rights have been given to it that are not available to Saudi human women. Now, that's not particularly contentious. It's an interesting question to raise. However, we jump ahead a bit, and he says this: the Saudis are not the only ones who promote empathy for mute props as a way to deny empathy to real but muzzled humans. It's also been done in the name of the anti-abortion movement. If you know anything about this movement like I do, you know how absurd that statement is, and the problem is, it's just this polemical throwaway line. He never bothers to justify why he even believes this. He never gives evidence for this. Anyone who knows anything about the pro-life movement will be able to tell you in a heartbeat that in actual fact, the pro-life position is not that you should favour one over the other. It's that you should favour both equally when it comes to respecting their most fundamental human right, the right to life. And so that's a complete mischaracterization. But, you know, we can live with mischaracterizations. It happens a lot in the world, regardless of what the issue is, as long as the person is actually not just throwing these things out there as this sort of polemic ad hominem. They're actually giving evidence, they're giving a justification, they make some sort of argument. But he doesn't do that. And there's a lot of that in this book. And like I said, I found that really, really frustrating. When he gets out of his wheelhouse, this is actually not a good book. I was reading this on a plane actually earlier this week, and some of the other passengers on the plane must have been thinking, what is this guy reading? Because I'm actually verbally sighing out loud in frustration, like, at parts of this book, because it really is that frustrating for me. As I said, I wanted to like this book, and I was looking for more substance. The other thing that frustrated me a little bit is there's a lot of, he uses obscenity in the book. Now, the issue of obscenity is not a problem for me. I'm not some sort of prude. You know, like, oh, I do declare, Mary Jane, that man was using a cuss word. I have never been so offended in my life. You know, it's not that kind of thing for me. Instead, it just feels like it's very lowbrow, and it's not a particularly good way of writing. This is supposed to be ultimately really more academic, and I don't necessarily mean academic in the sense of from academia, but it should be a book that's actually more academic in its tone, more precise, and just chucking in swear words as a descriptor for groups of people or for types of behaviour, I don't feel is precise enough. For me, it's a frustrating way of cheating, if you like, and not actually having to think and then write too deeply to make a more comprehensive argument to justify the position that you're trying to put forward. So for me, it's sort of things like that and other things that really show there's a sort of a lack of substance here. It doesn't really go deep. It doesn't explore really at all the way in which social media, I think, has a bearing on breaking down community and some of those other bigger issues that are missing. It sort of wants to pin a lot of things on social media when social media is effectively just one reason why certain things are happening in society. I would also say that probably the length of this book is realistically, and interestingly, he was a blogger. He talks about that in the book. It feels to me like there's enough substance in this book to actually write a interesting, even if maybe a little bit longer than usual, blog post, but not much more than that. And so it feels like there's a bit of padding and a bit of maybe distraction, things that just sort of go off topic, things that don't really relate to what's supposed to be the central topic. Some of the arguments feel a little bit repetitive. It feels a little bit like there's not quite 10 arguments. There's maybe less than 10 and just sort of some relevant points or you know, some justifications and sub-points to a lesser number of arguments. Instead, it sort of gets a little bit repetitive. But overall, as I said, it was frustrating for me. You know, if you're into this issue, it's, you know, the stuff about the algorithms is interesting, but again, there's just not enough developed around that to make it a particularly sort of comprehensive read on this topic. So for me, it's not a book that I'll be recommending to anybody. There are far better books. In fact, as soon as I finished reading that book, I've just started reading this one now, Screen Schooled, how 2 veteran teachers are exposing technology overuse and how it's making our kids dumber. And already, I'm only partway into this book, like literally into the first chapter. And for me, it's far more interesting already than the other book was because there's more depth to it. They're actually taking the time to make a coherent and focused argument, and they're also producing a lot more evidence to back up the claims that they're making. So for me, something like this, already I can tell this is going to be a far more interesting and engaging and I think important read about these issues than what 10 arguments for deleting your social media accounts right now was. As per usual, I'd love to hear your thoughts, so please let me know what you think in the comments section below. And if you like the content I'm creating and you'd like to see more of it, then please support me on PayPal or Patreon. There's a link for both in the video description below. That's right, I can hear my theme music too. I'll see you next week on The Daily Question.